Mike is the founder of the Australian Spy Museum in Sydney. He worked in IT, cybersecurity for decades before late in his career deciding to focus on bringing a passion project to life, and that is creating a museum that explains espionage and the origins of modern cyber threats. So the Australian Spy Museum, over 1,000 artefacts. It traces the history of espionage and cryptography from the Renaissance into the digital age. So I personally didn't know there was an Australian Spy Museum. I do now. And I'll be visiting very soon. I'm sure many of you will be visiting after this demonstration. So well done, Mike. Okay, I'll hand over to the mic. Let's put our hands together and welcome Mike.
Thank you very much for having me today. I really appreciate the time.
You got to whisper.
You know what, I'm not actually used to using one of these things. I'm quite happy to talk. No. You keep it, I'll speak up. So, first of all, thank you very much for accepting an invitation to come and give a presentation. I really appreciate it. And I know that I've found an audience here who will really appreciate this topic. The Australian Spy Museum started as an idea around about 2011, 2012. I can see Ed in the back of the room here, and no doubt there's other people here who work in cybersecurity and IT. I had a frustration around about that time when I went to a conference, thank you very much, on the topic of industrial cybersecurity, and it was very obvious to me at that time that there are a lot of people in the room who are struggling with the idea of attacks that are both invisible and ephemeral. They come and they go in minutes, right? And if the attack is destructive, you know that it's happened. But if someone just comes along and copies your data, right? Or if they leave a back door in your system so they come back and do damage later, you don't know necessarily that they've been there, right? And people struggle with the idea of an invisible attack, and they struggle with the idea that on the other side of the world there are people who get up every morning and their day job is to take us down, right? And I thought what could be very, very useful is some sort of educational resource or cultural resource that would educate people about the nature of espionage, you know, the indoctrination that drives our opponents, you know, and also a thank you to the people who work behind the scenes in silence to protect us and our economy. And so I came up with this idea, and don't ever do this, it's the most ludicrously expensive hobby, but you end up creating a collection of stuff that's truly very unique and very, very interesting. Two things that have been enormously helpful to me today. If you do take some pictures, stick them online, tag us on Facebook or Instagram or whatever social is, and tell your pals. Now, right now, the Spy Museum is a couple of storage units filled to the roof with stuff. I'm bringing around other institutions. I'm looking for places to run a guest exhibition. I've just applied to Inner West Council. They've got a gallery in Camperdown, and I've applied to get a 3-week exhibition going there. I'm trying to bootstrap this thing. I'm not asking for money, by the way. Just join the online community and follow along, and I have a lot of faith that over time I will find some people who want to be backers. In the collection, it's actually somewhere north of 1,500 artefacts. I've sort of lost track. So, you know, there's kind of 6 or 7 main domains. There's cultural artefacts, that's diaries, letters, signed photos, uniforms, flags, all the ideological stuff. It's super interesting. Cold War, we've got technology that came directly off the Berlin Wall. So signage, sirens, video cameras, sensors, those sorts of things. Whole bunch of counterintelligence here, right? All the gadgets. Recorders, bugs, cameras, specialist detection equipment, countermeasures, covert communications, dozens of spy radios and bursting coders and secret communication over infrared and all sorts of things like that. Cryptography, of course, these are just 3 or 4 of our machines. We have dozens of them. We've literally just brought into Australia a late model Soviet cipher machine from the 60s. I'm super pleased to get that. And of course, the birth of cyber. Now, one of the most interesting things about Enigma is that in the effort to break Enigma, the Allies quickly became aware that Enigma was the tactical cipher solution of the German army. There are thousands of these built. But behind Enigma, there was also the Lorenz machine and the Geheimschreiber T52, the Sturgeon machine, as they were codenamed, and those were the high command cipher machines which work over teleprinter lines. You know? Now, To break Enigma, the Allies developed the bomb machine, what's called an analog. So an analog is a machine that I build, which is my interpretation or re-engineering of your cipher machine, right? I capture your cipher machine, but I've only got one of them, and now I have it though, I can replicate it and I can create my own equivalent. That's an analog. So the bomb machine that the British built was their analog that would help them to break Enigma. And then if you ever get to visit Bletchley Park, be aware that there's two parts to the campus. There's the main Bletchley Park Museum, which is a wonderful place, and I think they do a fantastic job of telling the overall story. But the working bomb machine and the working Colossus computer, the first ever computer, are actually next door. They're on the same Bletchley Park industrial campus, but they're in a separate museum called the National Museum of Computing. So it's well worthwhile making a whole day of Bletchley Park. So part of what I want to do is tell the story of cryptography and the birth of computing and get kids really excited in STEM education by actually seeing things that actually work, right? And there's nothing more amazing than seeing cryptography rendered in hardware and actually being able to see how it works. So we'll do that shortly. Anyway, that's what we're about, and I hope that's interesting too. Right. The genesis. During World War I, 3 different groups simultaneously applied electricity to cryptography. Very, very interesting. Hebburn, an American, was actually serving time in jail for horse theft, which I think really helps to date. You know, he had lots of time on his hands in jail, and he came up with a single rotor cipher machine, the one that you see on the left. That photo is from the NSA Museum at Fort Meade, which is a fabulous place to go visit. There's also one in the Russian Cryptography Museum in Moscow. And of course, the two sides naturally managed to steal each other's stuff or buy them on the open market, as I do later. In the middle, Arvid Dam, a Swede, developed a machine. That's the last surviving fragment of his technology, which is also at the NSA Museum. And then on the right, Arthur Scherbius is given credit with developing the German Enigma during the World War I period. Now, of course, cryptography predates World War I. And there were very simple disks that we used for cryptography on the Confederate side during the Civil War. And we've got examples of various texts like that, but we're going to focus on Enigma today. One of the most interesting things about Enigma is the influence that it had on subsequent crypto solutions. People recognised that machine crypto was the way to go in the future, but the problem was it left open too many potential human failures which could be exploited by cryptanalysts on the other side. So the trick is, how can I engineer all the humans out of the loop to develop a solution which is harder to break, right? Enigma is very interesting from that point of view. And we'll look at a couple of weaknesses of Enigma. But, a big surprise. About 20 years ago, it turned out that 2 Dutchmen were actually the original developers of the Enigma concept. They'd been serving in the Far East, but because World War I was on, when they submitted their idea to the Dutch Admiralty, the idea wasn't progressed through, right, because of wartime. And the invention was suppressed by the Dutch until just after the war, and then when they went back to reapply, guess what? The Germany gazumped them by, I think, 3 weeks. So how did that happen? It turned out that the lawyer that they were talking to about their invention was related to Scherbius, who basically stole their IP. And the identical patent was submitted in Germany. Too bad, they lost out. A great shame. But anyway, here they are, and respect to these guys for coming up with the idea. There were several generations of Enigma, and what's interesting to note is that in the very early days, the machine at the top left and the one at the top were based effectively on typewriters. They were extremely heavy, ungainly things that used a platen like a typewriter to print output. Now, the key operational implication of that is that Enigma is inherently a one-user machine. I can type in the ciphertext and get the clear text out as a printed form, and then I can walk that over to my radio operator. But the downside of that is that the machine is ridiculously unreliable. It just has too many moving parts. And so at the bottom left, now there are no known survivors of the first 2 generations of Enigma. There are none of those left in the world. There are, however, 2 of the machines that you see at the bottom left, the Schreibende Enigma. A number of them were sold to Argentina before World War II, and one of those is surviving in a military museum in Argentina, and another unit turned up some years ago in Hungary. It's not fully complete, but it's in pretty good cosmetic condition. that unit has subsequently disappeared. Now, it could be in some basement under a museum, but I suspect it's in some glory mantelpiece location, some general's home or something like that. And it will no doubt reappear, as recently a Nazi looted painting turned up in Argentina. These things tend to happen over time. These are a horrendous commercial risk to take around the place, but on the other hand, because they're all serial numbered, if anyone stole my machine, there is no market for second-hand Enigmas, right? We all know each other worldwide, the people who collect these things. If you ever tried to sell one, you'd be ending up in a flaming pit of hell, right? So the machine that became far more popular and that took off was the one that you see at the bottom right, the Glühlampen machine, or glowing lamp machine. So this machine took a different approach. The output, instead of being printed page, was simply to turn on a light bulb, right? Press a key and a corresponding lamp comes on. The implication of that is that now Enigma is a two-operator machine. One person sits and types in the ciphertext, the clear text comes up on the lamp, and now the radio operator has to record the lighted output and then transmit that via Morse. Make sense? It's now a two-operator machine. And so when you find, there are very, very few photos of the Germans using Enigmas in the field, for obvious reasons, that was secret knowledge. But when you see photos, you'll always see that there are multiple troops sitting near the machine for that reason. Now what we have here is a 1935 patent German Enigma M1, the military Enigma. And by contrast, I want you to notice this thing at the front. This is called the Steckerbrett, or plug board. And the plug board is effectively using 10 of these little wired cables, like so. They come with the machine. And the Steckerbrett allows me to plug one letter to a different letter. And I'll get to that in just a second. But to go back one slide, notice how on the bottom right, this machine here has no plug board. Enigma was first developed in the early 1920s for commercial markets, and I've got an original sales brochure for it. It was sold to banks and things, and even banks in Britain had bought Enigma machines. They were certainly fairly common on the continent. And that's one of the reasons why we had a bit of a head start to understand what Enigma was when World War II broke out, right? It was available on the commercial market. And so one of the improvements that the Germans made to this machine, so when you purchased the machine, it turned up looking exactly like that. It had 3 rotors in it, removable components that make up the cipher engine, and no plug board. What the Germans did just before World War II with the Enigma machines that they had offered was they added the plug board, and that greatly increased the cipher complexity of the machine. Plus, to all of the units that they issued Enigma, they gave them 2 more wheels, right? So here we have the 2 additional cipher wheels. And what that means is that when I'm configuring my Enigma machine and I'm putting my 3 wheels into it, I'm selecting 3 out of 5, right? So automatically that creates a problem for the opponent cryptanalyst, because the first thing you have to work out is, well, which 3 wheels are in there? And not only which 3 wheels are in there, but which order have they been put in, which starting position have they been put in, and how have they got the plug board arranged on the machine. I'm not going to do all of the crypto math, but let's just think about this, right? I've got a big 3 wheels out of 5. So that means that in the first slot in the machine, right, and there we are exposing the crypto engine back here. These are 3 rotors, and they spin back and forth inside the machine on an axis. So for the first slot, I've got 5. Then for the second slot, I've got 4. Then for this third slot, I've got 3. 5 by 4 by 3, 60. So I've got 60 permutations of which rotor I'm going to put in which order. Then of course there's 26 positions on each rotor. So I've got 26 times 26 times 26. Then there's a slip ring on each rotor which adjusts the odometer function, right? Multiply those out by 26 apiece, then multiply by 10 cables here. So 26 times 25 times 24 times 23 times, you end up with a very, very large number. A very large number. I've heard things like, you know, there's more potential starting positions than there are grains of sand on a beach, and you know, I probably, you know, who can argue that? But let's just say it's a fantastically large number in the order of 150 million positions to start with. However, operational constraints on the way that the Germans configured the machine could make it easier to attack, as could sloppiness with the way that they operated the machine. And I'll expose a couple of those things. Let's just say if you go back to the days of machines that were hardwired to do a function, immediately I know by capturing operating manuals that the Germans recable 10 letters exactly every day. Not 1 today, not 5 tomorrow, not 11 on Tuesday, not 14 the next week. It's always 10. As long as I know that you're always going to reposition 10 letters, then it's easier for me to build an equivalent analog machine that reverse engineers your engineering. Does that make sense? Because I know the exact pattern of your machine and I know how you're going to set it up every single day. So now I can build a hardwired analog that mimics that function. In building the bomb machines, we could only do that because we knew exactly what the permutations, the possible permutations were for that machine. So, let's take a slightly closer look at Enigma. Now you understand why I have the webcam. So the machine comes in a transport case, a wooden case, or sometimes a metal case called a Panzerholz. We have one of those as well, but today we just, Panzer of course just means just a rugged transport case. But essentially you have a keyboard, the Steckerbrett, a plug board in front. Behind the keyboard you have the lamps which light up. I'll just put this down for a second. And something interesting that I want you to note is that if I press a single key, we're going to hit the P key, German keyboard, right? So P's down here. If I hit that P key, a lamp comes on. And the most interesting thing is that I can continue to hit P all day and a different lamp will come on. And notice how the rightmost wheel is turning over. See that? And most interestingly, note that the wheel turns over before the lamp comes on. I'm pressing it slowly. Watch the wheel. Right? Wheel, then lamp. And notice how every time I'm pressing it, all these different lights are coming on. But you know what's interesting? It doesn't matter how many times I type in a P, I will never get a P as a result. And we'll go into that in a little bit of detail. Oopsie, I'm trying to get the angle right. There we go. So what's going on under the hood? How does Enigma work? If I flip this latch, I love that clunky mechanical sound, right? Out comes the crypto engine. And the crypto engine of Enigma consists of 3 rotors that can be reordered on this spindle, right? I've got 5 to choose from, I only need 3. So I can pick any arbitrary 3 and put them on the spindle. And on the Enigma rotor, you'll notice on one side there's a series of electrical contacts that are flush with the surface, and on the other side are a set of pins, and the pins are spring mounted, so that when I push these together on the spindle and I squeeze them, those spring-loaded pins bring the contacts together on both rotors, right? So there's now, if I apply battery power to here on one letter, I will get power flowing through to the other side, but through a different letter. And what's happening inside each of those rotors is that the wiring, the contacts on one side are mapped to different letters on the other side. It's like a crazy maze inside, right? If you get a multimeter or even a simple battery and a lamp and you connect it to one side, it will light up differently on the other side. So it goes in an E and it comes out an L, or it goes in an R and it comes out a Q, or it goes in an A and comes out an M, or something like that. They're different for each rotor. Now, as your enemy, if I capture your machine, what I really want is I want to capture the rotors. And I want to capture your operating books. The machine, it's less important. It's more important to me to know the potential wiring that runs through the rotors, and it's more important for me to understand your operating procedure to actually drive the machine. So the Germans were under orders on the submarines when they were being depth charged and forced to the surface. The first thing that they were ordered to throw overboard was the code books. And the code books are terribly important. We have actually an original submarine code book, but I haven't bought it for obvious reasons. It's a bit of a treasure. But essentially the code books look kind of like this. For every day of the month, I get told which rotors to put in the machine, in which order, which is the starting position for each rotor, and importantly, which letters do I plug to each other on the front of the machine. And they change every day at midnight. So it doesn't matter how much effort you put into analysing Enigma on Tuesday, if you haven't broken it by midnight, all your work is toast. Come the next day. And you start from scratch. And that story is told quite well in The Imitation Game. The movie does have its technical flaws, but it's the best effort so far to tell the story of Enigma, right? But importantly, understand every day at midnight the Germans change their cipher. They literally open every machine in a radio network, reconfigure it to these settings, and they're off to the races and talking to each other again in a secure fashion because they're all synchronized to these settings. The key material in a cryptography sense then is these preloaded settings that I get given every day. I open up my book, I reset my machine, this is the cipher key. Or initialization vectors, I guess you call it, for the machine. So there we have it. So there's 3 rotors in the machine, there's crazy wiring inside. As the rotors slip against each other, what's happening is a letter that goes in as an A comes out an L or a Q or an M or whatever. And then with the very next time I press a letter, because those rotors slip against each other, they're bringing different contacts into each other's proximity, right? The energy flows through differently. With every key press, I am dynamically changing the wiring inside the machine. That's the secret of Enigma, right? It's a machine which, if those rotors weren't turning over, every time I press the key, the same lamp will come on. But every time I press the key, because, and we saw a second ago, because the rotors turn over first, that means the contacts change in the machine, and therefore the output goes to a different lamp, right? That's the beautiful thing about this machine. So, let's drop the lid. Now we have 3 rotors inside the machine. And we're going to have a look at how the daily settings work. How are we going for time? We're good, right. So we're going to have a look at, and I did this demo a little while ago for the submarine folks, so I'm just going to go with some settings that are kind of relevant to submarines. There's a little explainer there of how Enigma works. Essentially, when I press a key, it pushes down the seesaw. The seesaw at the other end lifts up, and there's a little, what they call a pawl here that engages that, turns the rotor over exactly 1 notch. Electricity goes in through the rotor maze, gets scrambled, hits the reflector at the other side, comes back, goes down here. If there is no plug present, it goes directly to the output lamp, but if there is a plug, guess what? The energy leaves the Enigma machine, goes out the cable, exits that letter, comes in via a different letter, and it re-enters the machine as a different letter. So it looks like I've pressed a W, and I'm going to get an L as a result, but because L is mapped to A, I get an A instead, right? If there's a plug, the power leaves the machine, gets back to a different letter. So, Stabsmaschine Schlüssel, number 28. These are the settings for October 1944. We're going to go to the 23rd, and we're going to run these settings into our machine. And you can see here that for the Bolzenlager, for the rotor order, we've got 5, 2, and 3. So I put in rotors 5, 2, and 3. And then on the rotor is this little bit of devilry. There's a little tiny cam here, which if I unplug it, allows me to slip the rotor around relative to its circumference. And what it's doing is it's changing the position of a notch that drives the odometer function. Now, ordinarily on Enigma, if I leave that at position 1, for instance, if I'm typing in the equivalent of an A and that rotor rolls over, then at position A, it will trigger the rollover of the next rotor by the odometer. But I get to change that position. And being the cheeky bugger German that I am, I'm going to change that at midnight every day as well. So the next column that I'm changing is the Ringstellung, which is the odometer position on every rotor. The third thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the Steckerverbindung, right? And that's the mapping of the letters from one to another. And then the last bit at the end is not a setting, it's an indicator that I use to tell you which day's cipher key I've used. Why do I do that? Because if a message arrives at your headquarters at 12:30 in the morning, you want to know if it was set with today's settings or yesterday's settings. So it's important to include the date indicator with every message that I send.
Can I just ask, that indicator, is that a transmitted indicator or a set indicator?
It's transmitted, and I'll show you that just now. So this is the way that we set up our machine. So 5, 2, and 3 rotors with these ring slip positions and these plug boards. Now I'm just going to turn my Enigma to the most brain dead setting, which is 1, 2, 3, which you would never do, of course, for obvious reasons. 1, 2. So this is how we set up a message. So pre-encryption, what do I know? I know that today's date, so I'm going to include the date indicator as part of the message header, right? The metadata around my message. And what I do is I'm going to put any two random letters in front of it. So today I'm just going to pick KL. So I put the date indicator VCX for today and I put KL in front. And then I have the clear text that gets written down on my radio message sheet. And I'm just going to send one word. I'm going to send the word submarines, for instance, right? And then I have my sender's initials, the receiver, Rob Muscat's initials. I have the time of day that I'm sending the message. I have the number of characters in the message. This is all going to the header of the message before we get to the body, right? And then I give you the initial settings for the rotors. Isn't that surprising? I'm actually indicating which rotor settings are in the machine. This seems bonkers because it's giving my opponent a foothold. Well, the Germans simply looked at how complex this machine was to set up, and they said, surely those Britishers, even if we give them this fragment of information, they cannot possibly guess the rest of the setup of the machine. And that's why it's critical. We're not doing a brute force attack against all possible outcomes on this machine, right? We are stealing machines off sinking submarines, and we're stealing code books, and we are looking at operational weaknesses or sloppiness that our opponent has, and we're exploiting those things to reduce the possible number of combinations to something that we can attack every day, right? So, amazingly, they tell you what the initial settings are for those three rotors. We don't know the rotors, we don't know the slip ring positions, and we don't know the plug board settings, but we've at least been told what the initial setting is. And with those initial settings, I now dream up three letters that I'm going to use to create a message indicator. And this was another weakness. It relies upon the Germans either following a code book to pick three letters or picking three random letters, not their girlfriend's name that they use repeatedly, not the day of the week, MON for Monday, not anything like that, all right? They have to pick three random letters, and humans are not very good at picking random. Today, I'm going to go with sub, which seems like a terrible idea, but I'm going to encrypt the word sub, and that's going to give me my message indicator. So let's go with SUB. Actually, I'm just going to finish that up. What will happen is when I take today's settings and I type in sub, the result will be WAW. Okay? And there's nothing surprising about the fact that I might get two W's, right? It's not random, it's entirely deterministic, but it's also entirely possible to get two W's out of different letters. And in fact, that's a highly desirable attribute. So here we are at our machine. I type in SUB, and you might be able to see up here that the resulting letter is W. U, oops, that's not a very good place to be. U results in the letter A, and then B gives me W again. So WAW is the indicator that I transmit to the person at the other end. And because their machine is synchronized to mine, because remember, every day we set up our machines with the same sheet, when they get a WAW, they will enter WAW on their machine, and guess what? They will get SUB. Make sense? Enigma is what we call a reciprocal cipher. Is if B equals A, then that also means that A equals B. That's another weakness in the cipher, and it's another way to attack Enigma. So now that we know that we have to set SUB as our key, let's now change our wheels to 21. Is that right? No, 19 is S, isn't it? There's a handy little line in the front. Besides saying, by the way, you'll be executed if you talk about this machine, there's this handy little letter converter. So now we have our machine set up with the secret key for this message. And the important thing to note is this sheet gives me the settings that apply for the entire 24-hour period. But those three letters that I just put in there are unique to this message. So the smart way to use Enigma is to take a big message and break it up into multiple chunks and send each chunk with a different indicator key. And that way, what I'm doing is I'm multiplying the effort that an opponent needs to attack my cipher. There was a famous incident, well it's now famous, it wasn't famous during the war, but there was a famous incident during the war where the Germans once sent a message of I think 1,600 characters in a single block. And when it arrived at the other end, the recipient said, your message is scrambled, I'm sorry you'll have to resend it. Curses. Did the operator change the indicator? No, they didn't. They made a dreadful, dreadful error. They used the same indicator and they sent almost the same block. with a few words or abbreviations included. Damn it, Fritz, here's my message. And when those two messages were intercepted and then were compared side by side, what it gave the Allies was what they needed to understand the relative position of the cipher machine. Yeah? Very, very simple operational errors like that will completely destroy your message security and can lose you wars, right? That's why Enigma is significant. So let's now move to the recipient. The recipient receives this. They get all of this information. And by the way, one other really interesting bit of information, Bletchley was intercepting thousands and thousands of messages a day through the Y stations, through the radio intercept program. And just having this information at scale, right, and being run through tabulating machines, like Hollerith machines, is enough to give you statistically useful information to be able to divine enemy intent. This was the birth of the kind of large-scale cyber intelligence operations that you see nowadays. And then they received these letters here, DDJ, QN, TQ, TOQ. What's a bunch of gibberish, right? The metadata can be intercepted by the enemy, but they get this gibberish. But to the operator, we now know that SUB is our key, right? We reverse WAW to give us SUB. We reset the rotors to SUB. And now let's type in those letters and let's see what we get. And I'm going to have to exercise a bit of memory here. So, actually, you know what? I'm going to type in the clear text and we'll get this result. But you understand, because it's reciprocal, you get the same thing coming out the other side. Yep. Let's flip back to our camera. So if I type in submarines, yes, that's great. Gives us a D. U gives us a D. Again, if I roll back 2 places, and if I type in the reciprocal of that, if I go to 2 Ds, there. See that?
Yeah.
Right.
And if you mistype one, you go back to the start and
Well, because it works off an odometer,
yeah.
if I ignore that one letter and proceed with the rest of the message, it's okay, but strictly speaking, they would resend the message, yeah? So let's just type in submarines and see what we get. What it's useful to note here is that you might type the same letter more than once and you'll get a different result coming out. And of course, thank you. And of course, the reason for that is because of the way that the rotors work. Every rotor has a W on it, and so therefore it's entirely possible through happenstance that I might type in an L and a G next to each other and get 2 W's out in sequence, or 2 D's, as we did here. There's nothing especially spooky about it, it's just kind of the way that the rotors work. The key thing being the machine is deterministic. Because it's hardwired, every day that I use those settings, I will predictably get the exact same result back out the other side. Okay? Yes?
That table with the October 44 settings,
Yes?
that's for a free rotor machine. I understand they increase the number of rotors, didn't they? Is that correct?
Correct. So this pattern of machine here is the 1935 here, or Army Enigma, also used by the Luftwaffe. The submarine service developed a 4-rotor Enigma. And the way that they did that was that they, here, on this side, they inserted one thin rotor. I forget, there was a special name for that one, but there was an extra thin rotor, and then there was a thinner reflector that went with it. Now that combination, of course, meant that the submarine cipher was inherently mathematically a bit bigger to crack, but more importantly, the submarines had more time under the surface to really refine and to almost super encipher their messages before they sent them. Now, as I mentioned before, I have some original submarine books, and what they would do is they would go to the first book, and the first book would give them code words for which they would substitute military terms for other words. They would write that down. Then there were special abbreviations and procedures that they followed, and then finally they would encipher the message on the full rotor machine.
Just a quick question though. Were they still using a 1935 machine in 1944?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. This machine survived all the way through the war. I have an expanded talk with war machines that kind of talks about Enigma's influence on others, but by the end of the war, the Germans were working on another machine called the SG-41, and it was actually largely based on the Hagelin machine with a crank handle, so the Germans like to call it the coffee grinder, because it had that sort of look to it. Those machines are exceptionally rare. A bunch of them got thrown into lakes and have been retrieved as Enigma has. I know someone in the US who won, I think he miraculously bought it for only $100,000 US. Because the auction catalogues that were due to be distributed in the US, someone screwed up and they didn't distribute all the catalogues. So he was the only bidder on the day at the reserve price. There is an M4 Enigma currently on offer via Bonhams. The estimate is that it will sell for between 200,000 and 300,000 British pounds, plus buyer's premium, right, which is about 28.5% through Bonhams, as I remember it. And I can assure you it'll sell for more than 300,000 British pounds. Yeah. They're really quite rare machines. Although I think in total, there are now more surviving submarine machines than there are intact machines. This one, by the way, is largely replica parts with some original parts in it. I get offered original machines frequently, and the prices vary between 100,000 euros and 200,000 euros depending on condition. So I had a choice. I either buy one original machine or I can buy a whole boatload of other spy stuff as well. And that's just a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't you get a machine with today's reliability but functionality? Now I want to just show you a little bit of the experience when you have two operators. So we're going to switch to a second pair of machines, and we're going to talk about Enigma's influence. Everything that was learned about this machine was then turned into some lessons learned into this machine, NEMA, the Neue Machine. This is the Swiss improvement upon Enigma. And the Neue Machine is very, very similar. You'll notice it doesn't have a plug board at the front. It has the keyboard, the lamp board, and the rotors. But notice now that there are 10 rotors. Right? Now, both the Swiss and the Russians took lessons learned from Enigma and built 10 rotor machines. The Russians, of course, being the work of Satan, their rotors counter-rotate. So all the evens roll forward and all the odds roll backwards. And not only that, the Russian machines features a function called re-injection. What re-injection does is, as the cipher stream is coming out of the machine, electrically it's picked up and it's re-injected through the rotors a second time. And what that means is that where Enigma, if I press a letter P, I will never get a P out. On the Russian machine, they solved that problem, and now a P will sometimes turn up as a P. It sounds like a small thing. It's actually a very, very big deal to a cryptanalyst. This machine works differently. If I flick open the lid, and they have the most amazing aroma, these things. That's a combination of, I don't know, sailor's armpit and old canvas, and, you know, whatever. I think it's actually decaying 80-year-old plastics, very early plastics. But inside here, you'll see that the rotor drum has 10 rotors, and what's interesting to note is the way that they achieve the cipher complexity here is by having far more variability in the way the rotors roll over. So here I've got a machine, and my letter key is the word Wollongong, because it happens to be 10 letters. And if I type in, I'll ask you to just hold that for me, just point it at the lamp board. So if we go with SUB again, so S, first letter that comes up is an R. Where's my U? R, K, P. Now we go to our second machine. So now I'm the recipient. I could be in Bern, I could be in, I don't know, I could be in Kathmandu. What do we say? RKP. It's really as simple and as beautiful as that. As long as the two machines are fully synchronized, then I'm in a really good position to be able to send secret messages. The key things are, I have to follow the process exactly. I must destroy the key material after using it. Never reuse the indicators. Never use sloppy terms like the first three letters of my girlfriend's name as an indicator, etc., etc. And with those lessons learned, we then arrive with another generation of German technology. To my knowledge, this is the only surviving unit of, the only one in the Southern Hemisphere of what's called a numbers station appliance. And what a numbers station appliance does is, at the back, there are plugs to take input from a computer to load the key material, or alternatively, the key material can be loaded via punch tape at the front here, or I can manually program the machine. Now, I manually program this machine. I have got a couple of Stasi Robotron computers from the 80s, but trying to resuscitate an East German computer from the 80s is not a small feat of work. It was enough effort to get this thing working. But what happens with the number station box is I load the key material into the machine. That way an operator never sees it. Right? No one ever touches the secret tape material. And then I also give it a number stream, which is my enciphered message, and what this box does is it turns it into speech. That then gets broadcast via shortwave. The implication of that is beautiful. It means that no one on my end ever sees the key. I broadcast it via shortwave. It goes out to, say, France and Britain, and where all my undercover East German agents are. And since nobody can tell who's listening to a shortwave band, it means you have complete deniability at your end as well. Every Sunday at 6 p.m, you tune in and you listen to my broadcasts, you get your secret instructions, and as soon as you've got them, you detune the radio and you burn the result. You carry out whatever action it may be, maybe you're dropping some polonium in someone's tea, I don't know, whatever it may be. And then as you walk your dog that Saturday, you just leave a little chalk mark on a bench, and that confirms for me as your handler that you received the instructions and carried them out. Complete deniability, we never touch each other. But this is what a number station broadcast looks like. This is the voice of the Stasi 40 years later. Message inbound. 93, that's my handler. 467, that's my agent number. Pay attention. And so with this beautiful piece of technology that persisted throughout the Cold War and that even exists today on the shortwave band, I've got a wonderful way to be able to take a secret message, reduce it to numbers with a one-time pad, broadcast it, and the only human on the planet that can decrypt that message is the other person with the corresponding one-time pad. That's kind of peak tradecraft, and we still kind of do this in a digital sense today. That's the end of the demo, and I hope you found this interesting.
Good, got about 5 minutes, so happy to, yes.
I've just looked up Spy Museum and your webpage, etc. You don't have a home, a physical home.
No.
How are you going to care for physical home? This is something
I don't know. No, literally. The problem. Okay, here's the essential problem. If I went out and said I want to build a spy museum, and I started having this conversation years ago, people look at you like you're kind of bonkers, right? And it is kind of bonkers. Like financially, this is insane. I could have bought a friggin' house for what I put in the collection. But these items are so rare, and I have many items in the collection which are truly unique. They were built for one mission, or there were so few of them that were built that they're almost unobtainium. If I wasted time worrying about premises and money and stuff up front instead of grabbing the artifacts, they'd all be gone. So I went and hoovered up all the best artifacts that I could find and got the collection to critical mass, and only now that it's at critical mass I can ring up people and go, hey, would you like me to turn up a couple of Enigma machines? And they're probably thinking, this guy's got to be nuts. But when you actually turn up with them, they're real, right? And so that was the philosophy, is to have something that is so real and undeniable that I could rock up to a government event or a corporate event. And I do a few corporate events. I'm doing one for a big bank. I'm doing one on the 1st of October for all their cyber and IT. And the idea is that, I kind of cover my costs just by doing a few corporate events, and I'm pretty convinced that sooner or later someone at Atlassian or Canva or government is going to turn around and go, this is so amazing from an educational point of view, we want to help you get going.
Any other?
It's like the worst business plan in the world, but I'm also convinced it'll work. If I didn't think it would work, I never would have done it.
Yeah, okay.
So obviously the way forward is to piggyback that onto cybersecurity and to use this as an introduction to what should be happening for the future.
You're 100% correct. Myself and Ed work in cybersecurity today, and as I said at the beginning, one of the great challenges is that for people who work in cybersecurity, our birth was in secret. All the machines were destroyed. No one was allowed to talk about it for 30 years. For many decades, people thought that the American ENIAC machine was the first computer, but in fact it was built at Bletchley a few years beforehand. And I just think it's kind of tough for people going into cyber. And here's the wild thing that hit me like a lightning bolt. Cyber people protect all of the other industries. It's one of the most critical things going. And yet, they protect all those other industries that have cultural institutions and libraries and museums, but they have none of their own. Despite being this enormously strategic resource. And so that was part of my motivation.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry.
I've got a question. The two dark grey models you've got on display at the front, the elements at the front, the they are duplication of the lamp displays for a second operator.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. And specifically, you'll notice this little black panel for Enigma. That's really just to dim the lights. So in an operational environment, I'm not kind of likely to give away my position. This machine here had a slightly different function. The lamps on the front could be completely blanked out, and then this unit would be reversed and face an officer at the rear. And that way I could receive an encrypted message and the radio operator would never see the instructions in the clear. Make sense? Yeah. It's just separation of duties in hardware, which is kind of a wild concept.
Yeah.
Just a quick one. So with your 3 rotary Enigma,
Yep.
an E comes into one, goes to a J,
Yep.
onto the next one, goes onto a D,
Correct.
goes onto the next one, goes to the, yeah, that's great.
Yep. And so there's an inherent weakness in the machine, and I'll illustrate it just by opening the top again. Actually, it's easier to show on this machine. But inside, if you think about it, the electrical path is going through the rotors and it's getting scrambled as it goes through each rotor. But how do you turn that around to come back out and then end up on a lamp? Well, that turning around function is called the reflector. There's 26 letters in the English alphabet, right? And so that tells you that there can only be 13 letter mappings, right? Because I've got to turn a W around and turn it into an E or an L to an R or a J to an I or whatever it may be. And that's one of the fundamental weaknesses. And that's why a P can never be a P, is because the electrical signal enters as a P and it has to exit the reflector as a different letter. Make sense? Yeah.
So how did the Chinese get on the Chinese characters?
I have a Chinese telegraphic code book, and really it comes down to reducing those to a manageable set. In fact, I actually want to buy a Japanese or a Chinese keyboard for exactly this reason, to kind of, you can't fully demonstrate it, there's a whole world to the way that they do it, and I don't pretend to fully understand it, but it fundamentally comes down to a symbolic representation, and then kind of using multiple characters to I'm not even going to try. It's too hard for me to understand. I'm not a Chinese cryptographer, but effectively they reduce the world of potential characters, which are in the thousands, down to a manageable set. And still with machines like this one, there are no number keys, so they would use simple phrases to represent larger numbers, for instance.
Okay, I have 2 more questions for yourself and
Yes.
the gentleman at the back.
Where did they find people to train if it was secret and there was no IT department or something like? Where did they find the people that could use this machine?
To use these machines, it's fascinating. There's a little vignette in the movie The Imitation Game where a young lady answers an advertisement and she says she likes doing puzzles, crossword puzzles. They really did do that, but they also just went out and they recruited people who had the right kind of skills. There are a lot of Debs working at Bletchley Park. About 70% of the staff were women, debutantes. So there was a lot of daughters from well-off families, and you know, the officer class, they all know each other, so they would recruit from within family and people who know people. But also there were people who came out of the mathematical and engineering disciplines from the universities. I've got some materials which came from Bletchley Park from the mathematicians there. Sorry, there was something.
Yes, just this one.
The keys.
I think the letter.
Oh, because these don't have umlaut on them and things like that? I think honestly, just to reduce the number of potential keys. So for instance, Cyrillic has, 33 characters, but on the Russian cipher machine there's only 30 keys. It just reduces it to a manageable number. When you read the word spelled out, whether it has an umlaut or not, you know what the word is.
Well, can we put our hands together again?